China is so heavily subsidizing that they will flood the market and make the plants we are building here economically unviable.
We don't have the luxury of time when it comes from China anymore. 2 decades of tech transfer, our industries have weakened. How much more time do we think we have?
U.S. China technology in the next 4 years. Welcoming to the show today, Peter Harrell and Nazak Nikakhtar. Peter worked in the Biden administration on the NEC and NSC doing international economics and export controls, investment restrictions, and all that good stuff. And Nazak was in the Trump administration after a long career as a civil servant where she was present at the creation of some of Commerce's work on China, working first at ITA and then running BIS for a little bit as well. Nazak and Peter, welcome to ChinaTalk. All right. Do presidents matter? We're going to spend the most of this episode talking about sort of, some strategic, but also some very tactical level stuff about the ways different laws and regulations get implemented at the working level. And I'm curious for both of your perspectives on, what the transmission belt really looks like, both up to a president and down from a president. Nazak, maybe why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, certainly. I think with the transmission level, as you called it, there's certain classes of decisions, and it just depends on really market impact and geopolitical significance, right? Everybody sort of in the careers in the U.S. government know the rules, know sort of the protocols. They work with the interagency, and they evaluate what needs to be done. And that's where then the political leadership comes in from the assistant secretary, undersecretary, and up. Then the assessment comes in is this something I need to elevate for additional reasons, geopolitical, major economic reasons, et cetera. And if that's the case, then the decision is made whether to evaluate and have interagency consensus, either at the assistant secretary, undersecretary level, the deputy level, or the actual cabinet level. All of this is still coordinated through the National Security Council, but it's those decisions that determine the importance of the decision in terms of those factors that I mentioned that dictate who gets to see it. Sometimes the decisions come from the president's level, right? I want to do this because I see this XYZ trend happening. What are my legal authorities to do this? And so it's a two-way street, more bottom up, more frequently bottom up, but certainly sometimes top down.
Maybe I'll build on that. So I think a president, you saw this, I very much from the outside saw this with President Trump, and then I saw it some from the inside with President Biden. I think clearly the president is ultimately the person who's going to set the strategic direction in the administration on where we want to go on China. So for example, do we want de-risking kind of in lots and lots of sectors of the U.S.-China economic relationship, or do we want de-risking in a more select subset of sectors? Do we want a wide sweep of prohibitions on U.S. investment in China, or do we want a more targeted sweep of prohibitions? Because as you can imagine, you get different voices in an administration, kind of around town, between the administration and Congress on some of these issues. And ultimately, it is up to the president to set the strategic direction on kind of, what do we want to focus on in the relationship? How wide or how narrow do we want to go? And kind of what do we think, 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, the end point that we want this relationship to look like is. So I think you need the president to kind of set that strategic direction so that then the agencies can go out and, use the tools in their authority in order to advance on that strategic direction. Then there are obviously, as Nazak talks about, also individual cases, individual tactical decisions that do have to come up to the president's desk. Some of that is because of the weight and import of an individual tactical decision. If you're making a really big decision, to say go after or sanction or put on the entity list, one of the biggest companies in China, that's something that I think rightly should go up to the president to get a chop on. And some of them are statutory. CFIUS, the investment screening process by statute, only the president can block a transaction. Now, sometimes the CFIUS committee might be able to persuade parties to abandon a transaction, but actually the authority to legally block a transaction is vested with the president. So that's something that if the recommendation from the committee to block the transaction was to block the transaction, sort of under the law, it has to go up to the president for that final decision. I would say, as a general matter, I would encourage presidents and the sort of senior staff around them to keep the president focused on the strategic priorities rather than weighing in to kind of, are we going to sanction this particular person versus that particular person when we're talking about, mid-level corporate officials or government bureaucrats. But there are also these big individual decisions that you do need to take up to the top.
I want to add something because I like where Peter's going with this. So I don't think any administration in recent modern history has done the following very well. Everybody's kind of set the grand strategy at a very high level: deter, tech superiority, military preparedness, work with allies. But that's it. That's where they stop. And so the federal agencies are kind of left to their own devices to figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? That's a problem. I would expect to really implement these strategies effectively is that it has to be more granular at the top level. What does deterrence look like? What are the things we should be focused on? Tech superiority. Where do we want to go in terms of technological superiority? How do we want to achieve it? Which are the tools that this administration is going to fully leverage to get there? That level of direction with specificity really does need to come from the White House. And it really starts with leadership. And I haven't seen, again, over like the last 20 years, that kind of specific direction trickle down that would give the agencies the power and the confidence to execute their powers and strategies. Everybody's kind of left in limbo going, okay, well, I think this is the right way to do it. But really, that level of direction needs to come from the top.
Peter, that kind of sounded like you disagreed. Let's get into this a little bit. Why are you a little more skeptical of White Houses getting or the most senior leaders getting a little more operational or tactical in their prescriptions?
Oh, I'm not sure if I do disagree. I do think maybe I'm kind of thinking from the top down rather than from the bottom up. I do think you want the president to set not just kind of the overarching, here are really big picture priorities, but going down a click or two from that. I mean, I think about, so for example, in outbound investment screening, something obviously the Biden administration worked on quite a bit. I think you do want the president to be deciding, not necessarily, should we focus on investment in this kind of semiconductor versus that kind of semiconductor, right? That's probably too deep for the president to focus on. But I do think it's important for the president to give that direction of, are we focused principally on technology investments here? Are we focused on technology and also supply chain investments? Are we actually we just want to pull the investment relationship apart? I think you do need that kind of level of strategic guidance from the top. And that's different from sort of, okay, we're then going to bring up a list of, 600 Chinese companies to the president and say, sir, we're going to spend the next 5 hours going through 600 names, most of which you've probably never heard of, to decide what we should do about them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, if let's say for tech superiority, right, the president says we've got it over the next X number of years, establish technological superiority. I want export controls, really leveraged. I want outbound data restrictions. I want capital flow restrictions. That level of prescriptive use of the legal authorities is really helpful direction to have to the federal agencies. And I don't want to say that it's not done in some limited respects, but a grand strategy in a way that's implementable, that gives better direction to the federal agencies, that's where we need to go now, right? I'm so tired of reading from think tanks and from reading everywhere, including the government, pages and pages and pages of, yes, we know. How are we going to do this? What are export controls need to look like? And Peter's right. We don't need to go to the granular level of the performance level of this chip versus that chip. But like, are we going to use export controls aggressively? Is it the small yard, high fence? Are we going to go a little bit bigger because we see sort of more stories about circumvention? What are the specific sectors we're going to use it? You know, what does sanctions on China need to look like? We almost go towards it in a reactive way rather than a big strategic, this is how we're going to do it, prescriptive way, implementable way. So the federal agencies just don't waste time and we just move fast. We don't have the luxury of time when it comes from China anymore. We've let 2 decades of tech transfer, supply chain, workforce, we've ceded it all to China. Our industries have weakened. How much more time do we think we have? You know, experiment.
Yeah. Nazak, let's stay on that for a second. So you're making the argument without like more clear strategic and like operational level direction, you kind of get stuck. Like, what are the forces on the other side from a sort of bureaucratic and an organizational collaboration perspective that means that there's just a bias towards inaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and I'd like to hear Peter's views on it too. But you have these federal agencies that for the last, better part of the last 20 years, I was there 20 plus years ago, and then I just returned most recently. And then in the meantime, I was, doing cases before the federal agencies. So I've been witnessing this for a really long time. It's over the last 20 plus years that the federal agencies have been indoctrinated in terms of globalism is good. And let me just be clear, the alternative to globalism isn't protectionism. It's just figuring out who is going to distort the global trading system such that maybe we shouldn't be trading with them, right? So the issue isn't globalism versus protectionism. But generally, it's this notion of globalism is good. We don't have to really worry about CFIUS, or we have these legal authorities or trade restrictions or export controls, because ultimately we want to promote trade because globalism is good. About 2015, 2016, America had this wake up moment. I don't think this is working in our favor with respect to China. And so the gear started sort of turning the other way. But the federal bureaucratic system for 20 years had been indoctrinated with this philosophy of this is my raison d'etre. This is why I come to work every day, to promote exports, to promote technology exports, to promote good exports of goods. Now it's an about face, and it's very hard for these career level people to kind of shift the way of thinking when they've been thinking about this other way so long. The other problem is that there's enormous industry lobby, right? Industry is going to advocate for its own interests. Industry will always advocate for its own interests. And it is the role for the federal government, the regulatory bodies, to understand that they need to regulate. And they should they should hear what industry says, but not always ultimately accept it as true and do their own due diligence. But because, again, the bureaucratic system has been indoctrinated in this way of, well, industry is right because we just need to promote, and really not protect, it's been really hard to get everybody to shift the other way, which is why I also see us moving in this sort of narrow approach. Well, we're doing it. It's kind of a middle of the road approach. Yes, we're shifting, but we're going to really shift it narrowly because we don't want to disrupt too much. Yes, it's true. Our economies and globally are now intertwined, and it's going to take effort to detangle them. But we also have to be clear on what the objective is, right? To provide clarity to the federal agency workers. Is it to de-risk? What does de-risk mean? Is it sectors? Is it to gradually decouple over time from the distortive actors? I don't think anybody in the federal agency has that level of clarity to understand where they need to shift their mindset to, because that's very important.
Part of the reason you don't get that clarity out of the White House, right, is because you have cabinet members who might disagree on what those answers are. You saw that in the Trump administration. You saw that in the Biden administration. You've seen that across American history, right? So, is this even like a reason? Like, can you have a team of, even sort of rivals a little bit. Like, I don't know if you can find cabinet members to be cabinet members who aren't going to be ambitious and have their own ideas, right? So, is this even a realistic goal to get the sort of harmony that you're hoping for?
Look, that's where the direction needs to come from the president, right? I mean, it was really disappointing, in the Trump administration, and I suspect this is true from every administration, to have, cabinet members just fighting over issues all the time. That's when you need executive leadership to come in and say, no, my position on CFIUS is consistent. For example, if the Chinese have laws that say that anti-foreign sanctions laws, that they're not going to comply with U.S. laws, then what do mitigation agreements in CFIUS transactions mean? Should we even believe any Chinese company that's going to adhere to a mitigation agreement? Maybe a president will say, no, I don't believe it because these Chinese laws dictate that they don't adhere. So Chinese transactions, FDI in the United States, that undergo CFIUS review, we really need to weigh towards sort of banning divestment, whatever. That's the kind of direction. You can't just leave these cabinet members to duke it out. And potentially a president should come in and try to get like-minded cabinet members to the extent possible. You don't want yes men all the time, but you want to encourage healthy debates. But you do ultimately want to select a group of cabinet members who understand what your objective is and are going to help you get there. Maybe they'll have differences in terms of, ways to get there, which is healthy. But you can't have cabinet members who fundamentally disagree on what the ultimate objective is, which, we see all too often.
Well, I was actually going to take it in a slightly different direction, which is I think I very much agree with Nazak that you need. It's not inappropriate for cabinet members to have different views. I mean, you probably don't want everybody around a president to have exactly the same view. But I very much agree with, and you want to hear you want him or her hearing a diversity of voices. But I very much agree with Nazak. That's why you need ultimately the president to make some decisions, to hear out the different views among his or her advisors on sort of where you might go strategically, and then to say, well, this is where I want you guys to go, and then everybody should get on the page and do it. The other thing you really need cabinet members to be able to do, especially in this complicated world we have vis-a-vis China, is to work together on implementing effective policy. Because I think the reality is that in order to effectively compete with China, we increasingly need to leverage different types of regulatory tools, policy tools, financial tools, and diplomatic tools that are kind of spread across different departments and get them working together to achieve goals that we all share, to achieve the goals the president lays out. And to give an example from earlier this year, and then there's another more recent one, earlier this year, the U.S. Coast Guard issued a directive that is going to make it harder to for American cargo ports, ports like the Port of Baltimore and the Port of Savannah, Port of Long Beach, to buy new cargo cranes from Chinese companies. China builds a lot of the world's cargo cranes. They've really invested in this area, subsidized this area over the years, but there are huge security risks with reliance on these cargo cranes because the cargo cranes are tracking everything that's coming in, and they can send that data back to China. And so the Coast Guard issued this directive saying, going forward, you're going to have to address these security risks, and that's going to be hard to do. And at the same time, because there aren't currently a lot of alternatives to these Chinese cargo cranes, because the Chinese have kind of consolidated the market, at the same time, the administration was able to find a little bit of bipartisan infrastructure law money to encourage a Japanese cargo crane construction company to agree to set up facilities here in the United States to, over the next couple of years, build some capacity here in the U.S. to build cargo cranes. So you sort of have the security angle. You can keep them out, but you also need the alternative. And so you got to pull together these other tools, which are in no way related to the Coast Guard, to actually find, which are Department of Transportation and that kind of thing, money to actually make it possible to build the domestic capacity to do it here. So you really need these guys strategically on the same page, and also telling their officials underneath the cabinet, like, you guys got to work together on all these different tools you have to get these sort of real world outcomes we want to see.
I mean, if I were, if like an ideal president would probably sort of set the stage, like, to tell every cabinet member, I need you to figure out all the tools in your tool chest to deter, right, China's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific, all the tools in the tool chest, and give me a report in how you're going to achieve technological superiority, how you're going to augment military and the related supply chain preparedness and capacity, and how are you going to better integrate with allies and better reach out to countries around the world where China has infiltrated, right? And just more appropriations for Congress is not going to be the answer, right? Because money is limited. Come back to me with reports, and I will have the NSC and the NAC evaluate it. I will evaluate it to figure out, if the strategy is in line or if we need a tweak. We don't have those kinds of directions ever coming down from the executive branch. We're in a way pretty disorganized in that it's very random. Policies are random on day one. Nobody's very clear on over the next X number of years, this is exactly how I'm going to do it. And it's haphazard, right? In a way, in some ways it isn't, like Peter articulated in terms of some of these executive orders that are coming out, but really pulling it all together is haphazard and is very reactive. And we're not going to win this strategic competition, or whatever you call it, race, with respect to China if we keep proceeding in a very haphazard way. China is extremely organized, right? We've got to step up our game, and that means organizational at the executive branch level.
Peter, let's you saw some Biden administration reports, right? Maybe supply chain is the case study we might want to think about for a second. Like, I read those, they were fine, but it was, and I think this kind of comes back to and maybe there's like the classified version, which was better, but this comes back to some of the work that Nazak used to do at ITA. Is it's just like a lot of the citations in that supply chain stuff were from industry, not from sort of like government independent research. And the sort of like institutional memory and your muscles to like even like think about these questions in this way. When I was reading those, I'm just like, good start, but like, wow, we really got a long way to go to tackle this stuff. So I don't know, Peter, any thoughts on like the executive branch report to policy pipeline and what could be improved there?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that make for an effective, for a report in government or a policy strategy in government that actually gets acted on, rather than one that kind of gets put out and then ends up in a box somewhere that no one actually acts on. The first, I think, is getting buy-in through the development of the report. Because the reality is, president can set direction, can tell cabinet agencies, here's what he wants done. But when it gets down to that granular level of, you have a mid-level career officer making a decision of, are we going to, sort of take a case this way or that way, or are we going to spend a little bit of our existing money this way or that way? You need those guys. You can't micromanage from the very, very top, and you need those guys to kind of have some buy-in in the vision. And so I think you have an effective report. You want to, sort of develop it in a way that gets some buy-in from the assistant secretaries, from the undersecretaries. So as they sit over the teams beneath them, are actually pushing them along the report's direction. And then the second is you need, some continuity in the officials working on execution, which doesn't mean, all administrations have turnover. And so it doesn't necessarily mean like the same people are there for the whole life cycle, but it means you need some continuity. And you also need the people who were putting the report together to be able to stay focused on execution, rather than, sort of finishing the report and then parachuting off to some totally unrelated area. If I look at the supply chain initiative that President Biden launched in early 2021, he laid out a vision. That report laid out a vision to build resilience in American supply chains in 4 sectors: in semiconductors, in large capacity batteries for vehicles and grid storage, for critical minerals, and for pharmaceuticals and APIs. And I'd actually argue, like, you've seen really quite good progress on the semiconductors and on the batteries. Nazak and I may disagree on whether batteries was the right focus, but you've definitely seen, between the Inflation Reduction Act and the Loan Program Office at DOE and the like, you've seen a lot of movement on that issue. And it's not all been domestic either. I mean, the administration has been out looking at these critical minerals agreements and trying to source some of the minerals for these batteries internationally and that sort of thing. So I think you've seen good progress there on the batteries and semiconductors. I think on, critical minerals, it's been much more mixed. And I think this is an example of where some senior level executive leadership would be helpful, because I think, we see a need for a huge number of new minerals going forward for green energy, for defense, for industrial applications and the like. But there is also, still getting things permitted here in the United States is incredibly painful. And there are a lot of constituencies that don't necessarily want to see new mines permitted. And I think this is one where if we're going to make progress over time, we need some stronger executive leadership of, we hear you on the need to have a mine be environmentally sustainable and that kind of thing, but actually we also need the mine. And so this is the kind of thing where I think some executive leadership would be helpful. And then pharmaceuticals and APIs, I think, is the one where, frankly, if I look at those four sectors the administration focused on from the beginning, we've made the least progress on. I think some of that is because the first year and a half of the administration, the health care part of the administration was, for understandable reasons, very focused on COVID and COVID-related shots. And so I think it was, they had a focus, which was understandable in the first 18 months. And so it was a little hard to get focused on, longer term APIs and, cisplatin. Some of the things have been in shortage over the last year and a half. And I think that is one where, I would like to see, whether Trump comes back, I do actually think there would be bipartisan consensus that is an area that we need to make progress on over the next couple of years, because what we've done there to date has not been sufficient.
Yeah, let me also, if I may, touch on the supply, because I think it's really sort of illustrative of some of the points I was making. I think the Biden administration hit some of the key sectors right now that we initially need to focus on really well. And I agree with those four sectors that Peter talked about that was laid out in the February 2021 executive order and then the June 8th, 2021 sort of fuller report. But here's the issue I have. Now I'm going to put my economist hat on. The report was fine. It sort of talked about the problems, but a lot of solutions were carrot oriented, right? So we're going to provide, and look, in the last administration too, I was a champion of industrial policy. I think we do need to invest in companies to quickly catalyze. We can't wait for market forces. They take too long when we're in this big race against China. We need the investments to catalyze the quick start of critical manufacturing capacity in the United States. But here's the problem, and here's where I think critical mineral is a perfect example. We're not getting the investments that we need as quickly as possible because everybody's concerned about China underpricing. What kind of price protections will industry get? We're going to build all these semiconductor manufacturing facilities, and China's going to underprice them as well, whatever they produce, right? We're going to build all these battery facilities in the United States, and China is going to underprice them. So unless we really signal very seriously to these industries that once you are up and running, we are going to protect you from China's predatory prices, I fear that some of these industries won't grow as quickly as we would want them to, and some may not grow at all. So it's that level of sort of what I would wanted the June 2021 to 250-page supply chain report to state was something more prescriptive, right? We're going to fund the growth of the industries, we'll provide tax cuts, et cetera, but we're going to give you the price protections you need to really grow and be healthy. And in terms of critical minerals, I mean, it's fine that we have these international critical mineral agreements, but we actually don't have still commercial processing capacity. What do these agreements do? We're setting up supply chains that we don't already have, right? And so we really need to focus on the critical mineral capacity. And I think part of the permit issue, and Peter's right, it is a huge issue, but I think some of it could be resolved with common sense approaches like, third party validators who can kind of look and say, this project is going to meet and exceed these environmental standards, and EPA or whoever federal agency, until you get around to looking at this, let the project go. If you then need to stop it because of some environmental issues that you have or pause it, we'll deal with that, but let us go. Don't let bureaucracy slow us down. Again, because we're in this race and we need to just think creatively about solutions to get us to move faster. And again, I really want to underscore, we've got to be a little bit more prescriptive. I think the answer is always, just having done this for a really long time, you've got to have the carrots, but you also have to have the sticks against the predatory actors, right? Not the sticks against the good guys, but the predatory actors, the non-market economies. The only way to do this is to have a stick so that we can protect the growth of our supply chains and our allies' supply chains.
So I want to agree very much with the macro point that Nazak made of if we're going to have successful growth of some of these strategic industries here in the U.S. and with our Western allies and partners, we have to think both about the incentive, sort of production incentive side, and also about the demand side. And, if we are investing in a bunch of critical minerals processing plants here, debate today in Washington, investing in legacy mature node semiconductor plants here in the United States. But at the end of the day, China is so heavily subsidizing and so unfairly subsidizing the plants in China that they will flood the market and make the plants we are building here economically unviable. That's not going to be a recipe for industrial policy success. If you look back at the 1980s, writing a book on sort of the history of security economics, and if you look back at the 1980s and the Reagan administration's focus on semiconductors, they had both an incentive side with Semitech and work with the semiconductor companies, and they also went out and pushed the Japanese hard to not dump into our market and to make sure their market was open to the U.S. And I think if we're going to have a successful, whether it's critical minerals or whether it's legacy semiconductor industry here, we both need those positive incentives. And we are also, frankly, going to have some barriers, whether it's tariffs or some other kind of barrier, to make sure that the Chinese production doesn't just undercut the market for these very plants we're trying to build here. And I think that is like bringing that kind of incentive side and also, market protection, or, you might think of it as kind of demand side measure in the form of tariffs or other restrictions. I do think you got to pair those effectively in order to see a successful industrial policy.
Ooh, we're getting a Peter Harrell book. This is very exciting. Coming back to a point you made earlier, Nazak, on what your priorities are. Like, the one you sort of left out is like the bigger economy. And there are trade-offs involved in all of this. I think there was a report that BIS just released about all of the waivers it's given out, and it was like $350 billion of Huawei waivers over the past 5 years or something. And on the one hand, it's like, oh my God, I thought this company was on like every list. How are they getting $350 billion of waivers? On the other hand, $350 billion of revenue is not something to completely roll your eyes at. So how do both of you guys think about these trade-offs?
I mean, so I think the Huawei thing is a perfect example, and it goes to another sort of pet peeve, and this is sort of all, the last two administrations kind of didn't do this in the optimal way. So yeah, like we put Huawei on the entity list, and then, about a year and a half later, we switched the licensing criteria to mostly case by case, which, statistically, the U.S. government, when the licensing review criteria is case by case, it has the 99+% approval rate. So that's a problem with respect to policy. We should be talking about, is this the sound approach we need to take? But on the diplomatic front, that puts egg on our face. We are talking to countries. We are talking to the Dutch to restrict their lithography equipment. We are talking to the Japanese. We're talking to the other countries about restricting their exports of choke point capabilities to China. And they're looking at the United States and saying, but you're licensing the heck out of everything, right? And all of your big export control rules still have massive circumvention potential, right? So why are you telling me to restrict myself when US government, you haven't disciplined yourself in terms of restrictions adequately? And that's it's fair criticism that they would make. In terms of sort of the larger economy, there is enormous merit. When I was at the Commerce Department, we just for intellectual extra purposes just thought, okay, well, what would be the economic impact if we just totally decoupled from China? Financial flows, goods, services, tech transfer, et cetera. Assuming that there was substitution, right, which is what we're trying to achieve right now, the impact on US GDP was 3 to 5% in the short run and enormous gains in the long run. If we integrated our supply chains with our allies rather than with China, the GDP growth for our economy, Europe's economy, Japan, South Korea was that much more. So on the broader economic argument, I am stunned to see people reluctant of moving our supply chains from China still, tech transfer, whatever, capital flows, fully away from China and integrating it, well, putting a lot of it in the United States and integrating it with the rest of the world, when we know that those economic gains are far greater. That should be part of the conversation that isn't happening right now.
Peter, you want to steel man that for a second?
Look, I think that when I think about the sort of macroeconomic impacts, I think that we've seen a lot of going back, frankly, to the Trump administration. There's been a certain amount of kind of sky is falling kind of rhetoric around some of the traditional free trade economics community. Tariffs were going to blow up the global economy, that some of these other measures were going to blow it up. And we just haven't actually seen that happen. And I think, what we are in fact seeing happen is that when you have kind of an orderly process and you kind of make sure that companies have time to adapt and to move on and to figure out how to diversify away from China over time, there is an orderly way to address our national security and economic security risks that doesn't kind of blow up the global economy. I do agree with Nazak that when we, the U.S., are seen publicly as sort of enacting very tough regulations, but then creating lots and lots of loopholes to them, the allies do notice that, and it does make it harder to get them on board with taking steps, such as export controls of their own on semiconductor tools and the like, that will be quite costly, at least in the short run, to a number of their companies. The other thing I keep in mind on the Chinese market, especially for the tech industry, it's certainly true that China is, whatever it is, 16, 18% of the global economy. And if you couldn't sell machines or chips or whatever into 16 or 18% of the global economy, that's going to be a non-trivial loss for you. But the thing to remember is a lot of the reason many of these tech products like semiconductors and the like are so overwhelmingly sold in China is because China has become this kind of factory floor for assembly for the rest of the world, and so yes, China writ large might buy 50% of an American semiconductor firm's semiconductors, but those are all then getting embedded into, laptops and phones and TVs and things that are being sold here and in South Korea and in India and everywhere else. And as those supply chains diversify, that kind of assembly supply chain diversifies away from China, China's share of the market on these semiconductors and things like that is going to come down. It's not that the market's going to, the overall market's going to go poof. It's India will be buying a lot more than China is, because India will be where the stuff for the U.S. and Europe and the rest of the world is assembled. And I think that this is a dynamic environment, and a lot of those sales, when we cut them off to China, they're actually going to end up moving to another market rather than just kind of going poof or being lost to Chinese competitors.
And I think just one more layer that's important to add, and I agree with everything Peter said. This argument that, well, I need the China sales to make revenue, at least in the semiconductor space, equipment space, that narrative is no longer valid because you have so many countries now doing CHIPS Act and CHIPS Act equivalents, right? Called something else. These equipment makers now have alternative markets to sell to. Just like we built China's semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem, we can do that in the United States and other allies. So these kinds of arguments, I think we need to think really critically about. Is China your only market? anymore. If the answer is no, then we've got to say, you know what, stop selling to China, because the more you sell to China, the less you're selling here, the less you're selling to allies. And those are the ecosystems we're trying to build now.
So I want to push back a little bit and maybe take it up a level. I mean, no disrespect to the economists at the ITA, and maybe this is like, maybe I'll like put in a FOIA for that report, Nazak, but like, that seems like a pretty low estimate of like the U.S. and China not trading tomorrow. You only get 5% short-term hit to GDP growth. I mean, there's going to be some real inflationary effects. And coming back to our conversation on the president's side, it's like, look, like a president's number one priority is not the U.S.-China relationship, really. Like maybe 20% of their day is spent on foreign policy, and of that, 25% gets allocated to like Asia Pacific stuff. So it seems like almost unrealistic to expect like an entire national vision for like a presidency to revolve around supply chain resilience or what have you. So like thinking on that, Peter, you've been tweeting recently about Trump's vision for tariffs and like what sort of second order economic impacts it could potentially have. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of like tariff story and maybe more broadly, like how far you can bend the things that us three care about without having other impacts on different domestic priorities that the president and cabinet officials have going on in their life.
Yeah, I mean, so let me sort of start by talking about, and I say this obviously as a former Biden official, but looking at what I see in the press and on the Trump campaign website about tariffs, and I am deeply skeptical of his 10% global tariff. We talk a lot about the tariffs on China, but he has also proposed a 10% tariff on imports from everywhere else, which would, appear on the face of it to include things like, avocados from Mexico and Ozempic, which I think is mostly manufactured in Europe, and, things that are really going to drive up everyday costs without having much of a strategic benefit. But look, I think tariffs are a very appropriate tool to use to protect our market from Chinese unfair competitive practices, and also, frankly, just to protect our market in strategic industries. And I do take the point that you can't just focus on China, because if you only focus on China, you'll see Chinese goods get diverted to Southeast Asia and to Mexico and that kind of thing. So you do need to make sure you are, looking at Chinese goods and Chinese companies and not just kind of China as a territory. But I think we should be focusing our tariffs principally on China, not on a whole bunch of stuff we're getting from our allies and partners, which I do think would increase costs for everyday consumers on a bunch of non-strategic kind of items. But an example of a tariff that I think does make sense. I mean, let's talk about the electric vehicle tariffs, and batteries and component tariffs, which started under Trump and which Biden recently announced that he would be hiking to 100%. Reality there is that the tariffs that Trump had imposed on a bunch of things, but including various EV and EV parts, had protected the United States market from being flooded by cheap Chinese EVs the way we're seeing the European market get flooded from cheap Chinese EVs. But as China continues to subsidize its own sector and drive those costs down further, the level of tariffs that we had inherited was increasingly looking like it would be inadequate to continue protecting the U.S. Market. And so I think you saw the Biden administration take a step to hike those tariffs to continue to protect the U.S. market from that kind of unfair and counter to our strategic interests Chinese production.
I just want to add, so Jordan, you asked about sort of the importance of supply chain resilience and why it's sort of such a big factor, I think, because it goes to the core of like preserving the U.S. economy and then also preserving the U.S. military. Sure. Our military capabilities are right now dependent on really critical supply chains in China, and that sort of forms the basis of these arguments and the focus on supply chain. You had mentioned that you had sort of an issue believing the credibility of the report. Now, what
I just want to see the model. That's all.
No, it's fine. It's fine, but I don't want that 1% to detract from the point of what I'm talking about, right? And maybe economic models will do different things. But the point I was making is twofold. One, if from just sound logic, we would actually do better if we integrate our economies, our supply chains with our allies who actually believe in trading by the same trading rules, right? It stands to reason without the IP theft, all of that, it stands to reason that our economies will grow faster. The other point I wanted to make is that, the report does assume substitution, but if you all will recall, and the listeners will recall, 20 plus years ago, before China joined the WTO, we could all still get everything we needed to. So this mindset of that the sky is going to fall if we gradually move away from China, I don't adhere to, because just when you look 20 years ago where we weren't that integrated, we were all still able to get the things we needed. And 20 plus years ago, I was a poor law student living on student loans, and I didn't have a problem furnishing my apartment, getting a laptop, doing all those things I needed to. So I think this hysteria about gradually moving away from China and the huge economic impact is overblown.
But Nazak, I want my Apple Vision Pro. I don't think India is going to be able to make one of those anytime soon. Come on.
My family members would agree with you.
I wanted to pick up on this theme of working with allies and partners a bit and talk about a specific recent example. I do think it is very important that we work with allies and partners on diversifying away from China for a couple of reasons. I mean, first, it is going to strengthen the allied and partner relationship. Second, you actually need an allied and partner market, both on the supply chain front. Some of our allies and partners have commodities and technologies that we don't have. And if we're going to build a successful market, we have to have those commodities and technologies. And also because you need a larger market to compete with China. And I want to give, if it's kind of just China versus the U.S., like we here in the U.S. may not have enough of a market to build cost competitive products in all areas. But when you put together allies and partners, you have a larger potential market that we could build our own very cost competitive products relative to China. To give a recent example, the U.S., Finland, and Canada announced a partnership, a three-country partnership to build capacity to build polar icebreakers. These are a specialized class of ships going in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, which have historically mostly been made, well, not long-term historically, in recent years have mostly been made in Russia, and which China is trying to get into the market for, the way China's kind of conquered a lot of the shipbuilding market over the years. And the idea here is that, the U.S. itself only needs a couple of icebreakers, but if you can build, and doesn't have a ton of capacity, but if you can build a supply chain between the U.S., Canada for the North American market, Finland for the European market, you actually create a critical mass on the market share where we could build a competitive, economically viable ice-breaking ship construction market. And I also think this is another example of kind of where different tools come together, because this partnership that was announced yesterday in some ways came from a genesis going back to the Russia sanctions. The Russians, pre-sanctions years ago, had actually bought out one of the big European ice-breaking shipbuilding yards, which was in Finland. And after Russia invaded Ukraine, sanctions kind of forced those Russian owners out of that Finnish shipbuilding yard. And then Canadians came in and bought it. And so you could sort of see on the commercial side how this alliance was going to come together. And now we've expanded it into a diplomatic and market type alliance. But it really shows, like, you just aren't going to have enough of a commercially viable icebreaker market with the U.S. alone. You build it out transatlantic, you do have a viable market.
ChinaTalk is in the market for an official icebreaker. If any of the manufacturers out there would like to sponsor or give me a tour or let me record an episode from an icebreaker, I will take that under consideration. We might be able to give you guys a discount if you throw in an Arctic trip. But no, I mean, it's a fascinating one. And these are the sort of things where it's like, look, we're talking about semiconductors and legacy chips. These are, $100 billion, $1 trillion industry. These are $1 trillion industries, but it almost seems like doing the like slightly less sexy, more creative stuff where the government has like a larger relative role to play. And as a buyer, or, you can spend more dollars and have a higher sort of like percentage change of what's happening is a really exciting way to like figure out the long tail of this supply chain resilience stuff.
It comes back to what Nazak said earlier. I mean, if you want to have resilient, a resilient non-China dependent supply chain, you need to think about both the incentive side and also making sure you have a viable market, which means having some scale on the market and making sure the Chinese can't flood their cut rate, subsidized, and raising national security risk stuff into it.
Like the supply chain thing I mentioned almost as a rhetorical device. And what I was thinking of is this anecdote from the Obama administration where Richard Holbrooke walks into the White House. He's like the head of he has some like special rapporteur Afghanistan position. And he has this whole grand theory of how to sort of change what the Taliban is doing by getting to Pakistan. And the way you get to Pakistan is by putting an offer on the table for Russia and China to like change how they deal with Pakistan. And then that will end up, solving your problems in Kandahar or whatever. And he gives this like giant vision. And then Obama goes, Holbrooke, like I have other things I care about besides Kandahar province. And I think, when I'm thinking about like the conversation we're having, like there are trade-offs involved in doing the like really hard version of this. And, like I hear what you're saying, Nazak, but I would also not like to go back to living in 2005. And I do think that you don't really want to entirely, like, it would be nice if we didn't have to entirely write off all of the gains that global consumers and firms have had from having a billion new consumers on the market, and integrating China into the global economy in some ways or another. So maybe just one more time on that for you of like, you're painting, I think, a very aggressive vision of what decoupling would look like. But you see a question there.
And no, it's a fair question. And let me just put in context the 20 years ago thing. It wasn't like we're taking all our technology back to 20 years ago. But the point is that, we had resilient supply chains and people weren't feeling, technology was progressing then too. Technology will progress with or without China, right? And the reason that I've come to the conclusion that I really do think that we need to detangle our supply chains away from China is just the fundamental notion that China, the government controls the economy. It's a distortive, non-market economy. And just as a pure sort of comparative advantage model, the markets work better when you have market economies working with one another. And when you bring in a distortive element, it disrupts the equilibrium. It disrupts the flow. And that distorted market is going to it's going to be the center of gravity and pull everything into its market. And that's why we're going through these discussions and these debates of what do we do about China, because we've seen the effects of the distortion through the last 20 years of China's growth into the global market space. And if one accepts the premise is true that you really can't have market forces and non-market forces in the economy at the same time because of those distortions, maybe you can have a little bit of those distortions, but not the huge way that China has become in terms of a global trading power. If you accept that premise is true, and I'm not here to advocate one position or another, I'm just here to provide facts. But if you do accept that premise as being true, then it stands to reason to think, I've got to remove these distortions to make sure that the economy works in a healthier way. And that means trading with countries that are also market actors. And by and large, the non-communist countries generally are. And then how do we make this global trading system work? We don't abandon the global trading system, but we should always look to eliminate distortions, certainly.
So we got two lawyers on the pod today, and I want to relay an anecdote I had recently. Like, I had some clever idea for some new government regulation. A civil service person said, "Jordan, this is great. I think it's an awesome idea. It's totally doable. You just need to write the regulation for me." And I was like, don't you have lawyers to do that? Like, why is this my job? I have a master's in economics. And this person goes, all the lawyers do is tell me I can't do things. What gives with that dynamic?
Well, I guess I'll make an initial point, which I do think creative lawyering is hugely important to effective policy making, because the reality is we have a statutory regime that is out there, whether it's CFIUS, whether it is IEPA, which is a really important flexible sanction statute, but which is also being adapted now to be used on data and on know your customer requirements for cloud services providers and the like, or whether it's on export controls and export administration regulations. You definitely need creative lawyers out there who are going to help you get to yes on how you can do this within an existing statutory frame. I've never served. I am a lawyer. I have private practice, but I've never served in government as a lawyer. I will say, being a lawyer policymaker when I have been in policy roles in government has been enormously helpful, because I can have a legal argument with the internal counsel. I'm not counsel when I'm in government, but I can, kind of argue, well, here's the statute, here's a case, like, what, you go tell me why I'm wrong on this interpretation of the law. And I think that is a hugely important skill to have for policymakers grappling with these kind of legal regulatory issues. Obviously, when a policymaker just wants to do something that isn't legal, you need the career counsel to say, no, sir, no, ma'am, that is simply not legal. Like, I don't begrudge the lawyers for saying no. In my private practice, I've certainly had to say no to clients, but I think that's really the balance you want. You want somebody who's going to think creatively. Yeah, that interpretation works. And when they just can't get to yes, they then have the spine to say, no, we've tried to be creative here, but we just can't. We just can't actually. You sir, you ma'am, can't actually do legally the thing you want to do. I will say, one of the I think benefits of working on China-related policies, this is one of those areas where we can get Congress to act. And so where there are limits in existing statutes, I think we've seen both under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration quite a bit of success in getting Congress to enact new laws that address these threats. And to give an example, the Trump administration tried to use IEPA, the statute I just talked about, to ban TikTok in the U.S. to force a divestment, and TikTok got the courts to enjoin that. And obviously, a few months ago, we had Congress pass a new law that more clearly empowers the administration to force a divestment or to ban TikTok. TikTok is still suing on that, but I think this is an example. I'm optimistic that the courts will uphold that law, and I think this is sort of an example of where some of these old statutes maybe don't provide the legal authorities we need today. We're seeing clear will from Congress to say, you know what, we're going to give you the legal authorities you need today.
Yeah, Jordan, just going back to, I agree with everything Peter said. I think the core of your question is this, the premise, what do government attorneys feel like their roles are, right? Like you said, corporate attorneys kind of look at how do I drive forward the CEO, the board's, whatever strategic vision. I think government lawyers feel that see their view as the opposite, which I'd like them to think more along the lines of you articulated, but they really review their role as sort of the policy people are the clients. And my job is to advise them on when it cannot be done because of litigation risk. Literally, I will tell you from having litigated against the U.S. government and brought trade cases, all of that stuff for over 20 years. there's always litigation risk. There's litigation risk with everything, right? And so that isn't a deterrent. You really weigh the likelihood of success or not. But if the government attorneys really view their roles as just advisory, policymakers make the policy, and I'm going to take a passive role and say yes or no, right? That's not pulling in all of the resources and all of the strategic thinking to advance where we need to go. So I think your question is, or I would emphasize that your question is very important, and that let's rethink about what the role of everybody in the U.S. government is, right? Whether it's the policymakers, whether it's the lawyers, whether it's economists, whatever. Shouldn't it be incumbent on everybody to continue to think of creative solutions? Because the problems are significant, and the reality is that we're not where we need to be in terms of solutions quite yet.
I think we named our first episode, Peter, Bureaucratic Barriers to Competition, which has basically been the theme of this one as well. If you guys want to fill out a pie chart, we've talked about anxious lawyers, we've talked about presidential direction, we've talked about feuding cabinet members. Do you want to assign sort of percentages on what is in the way of achieving, I don't know, optimalness?
No, I don't want to assign percentages, Jordan. I don't want to leave with a negative impression. I mean, if I look, I started in government service in 2009, and I'd earlier in my career in sort of the early 2000s covered Capitol Hill, foreign policy on Capitol Hill as a reporter. And if I look at kind of where we are on China policy, not just at a conceptual level, but in terms of the implementation compared to, frankly, even 9, 10, 11, 12, when I was at the State Department, it's just been a total sea change. And it hasn't been, 100% smooth getting there, to say the least. But I actually think you are seeing, across two administrations now, yeah, there have been ups and downs. There have been bumps, not going to dispute any of that. But I actually think we're in a, compared to where we were, we're in so much better a place. And I think there's kind of, again, kind of regardless of the outcome in November, I think we're going to see kind of further steps here on China to secure our supply chains, to maintain our tech advantage, our high tech advantage over China, and to build global diplomatic coalitions. And I'm actually, I try to step back and remember, I'm pretty optimistic about where we are and what the future looks like, despite sort of on any given Tuesday thinking maybe I should tear my hair out over what's going on today.
I would probably add that, if from my vantage point, I think what's been missing from the U.S. government is just a team at the White House level that kind of has the qualifications that Peter does, broadening out the team, that really says, this is how we're going to do it. These are the tools in the tool chest that we're going to use to achieve slowdown, to deter, to U.S. technological growth, U.S. military growth. Put a strategy like that has those elements together, international engagement, lists all the tools in the tool chest, and really directs the federal agencies to execute, rather than kind of just this sort of, reactive approach about, some prescriptive at the White House level, but generally reactive in terms of, what do we do next? What do we do tomorrow? What else should we be focusing on? Have the strategic vision in an implementable way with a small team of visionaries who really understand how these legal tools work, and then just start executing. I wish somebody brings that level of thought and strategy into the White House, because I think we could get a lot done if the policies start with that basic group level of thinking.
Peter, one for you from the audience about outbound investment screening. So the notice of proposed rulemaking outlines two approaches on whether it should include exceptions for passive investments in foreign funds that invest in restricted tech in the PRC. Option one is invest in them unless the investment is active, and the other is to capture all investments over $1 million. What's the right answer?
I think we should capture all investments over $1 million. I think it is important to go after passive investments, but we're going to go down in the weeds on this because Jordan, you and your audience really like the weeds. I want to differentiate between investments in publicly traded securities of Chinese firms and kind of private passive investments. So like passive private equity or the passive venture capital investment. I actually think the outbound executive order is correct to not capture investments in publicly traded securities in Chinese firms, primarily because the U.S. government, starting under the Trump administration, has another tool to prohibit Americans from investing in the publicly traded securities of Chinese companies. That's the CMIC sanctions list. And I think that if the U.S. government determines that it doesn't want American investors to invest in Chinese company X or Chinese company Y or Chinese company Z in the publicly traded space, use the CMIC list. And I think the Biden administration should actively be using the CMIC list for that purpose. I think where you're talking about passive private investments, where you're putting millions of dollars of private capital in some private AI firm in China, like that should absolutely be captured by the outbound investment rule, because there's no other tool to capture it. The CMIC list only covers publicly traded securities. There's no other tool to capture that private investment. And B, I don't want that AI company getting millions of American dollars to be able to develop that AI technology in China.
Yeah, and it's also, there was a good CSET report I will link to. I think basically it sort of like gave the best case that I've read about the like soft support that you get. The argument that industry would make against that is like the capital is fungible and there's a like relatively liquid and successful Chinese venture community. How well they're doing nowadays is, I think, a very open question and something that even like Xi Jinping has started to stress about. But there is this aspect of know-how and sort of global connections and whatever like VCs pitch alongside their the money that they're giving to your cap table, which particularly when it comes to these sort of like critical dual use technologies is like not the sort of thing that I think the government should be super cool with. Whereas me buying some, I guess Huawei's not public, I don't know, me buying some like Alibaba stock or whatever isn't really going to like dramatically like change the forces, the fortunes of that company. So one more for Peter also, because you said you're writing a book and reading some history. You got any like fun documents you've come across so far? One or two more anecdotes for us to build the anticipation, help sell your book. I don't know.
So I think there's a lot of interesting history out there, and I'll give two examples. I say these just as historical examples. The first is kind of the illustration of there's nothing new under the sun. Everything comes around again. Over the last couple of years, I think there's been various arguments around town about how to handle a potential tension between kind of the American large tech community for antitrust competition purposes, and how do you also make sure we are well positioned vis-a-vis China, which has large tech companies. And you've seen the sort of tension about will competition policy antitrust cases undercut America's competitive position or reinforce America's competitive position. And if you go back to the early Eisenhower administration, the FTC put together a report on the role of major American oil companies in global oil cartels. And the State Department tried to kill the report because the State Department kind of thought, these American oil companies are sort of championing our interests around the world, and we want them to be able to participate in these global oil cartels. And there's a big fight in the Eisenhower administration about how to handle that issue. And it sort of has interesting echoes of the debate we have today. And then the other thing I think we need to think about when it comes through in the history is the kind of balance between innovation as a way of securing supply chain resilience and investment in existing technologies as a way of securing supply chain resilience. And if you go back at the beginning of, or the run up to World War II, run up to America's involvement in World War II, the U.S. was the world's biggest rubber consumer, rubber for tires and hoses and everything. And the U.S. was getting most of its rubber from then British Malaysia, which was about to fall and did ultimately fall into Japanese hands. And you get our rubber supply cut off. And of course, we're looking at, if we are going to go to war, we're going to need a ton of rubber. And, at the time, Henry Ford and some other folks were trying to build alternative supply chains by building rubber plantations down in Brazil. And there are all these great, photos of Henry Ford in the late 30s down in Brazil and the like. And what actually ended up working to solve the rubber crunch was the administration, the FDR administration, sat the big American tire and rubber companies together, Firestone, Goodyear, all these guys, and said, we're all going to work together to develop commercially scalable synthetic rubber. And it ended up being a synthetic rubber solution rather than, building plantations down in Brazil. And I think that's interesting to think about as we have these debates today about critical minerals.
I love that. Nazak and Peter, thank you so much for being a part of ChinaTalk.
Thank you.
Thank you.